Alrighty, welcome to today's CARS session for the MCAT. And today we're going to be talking about CARS question types, the specific types of questions you're going to run into, and an approach or some things you want to think about when it comes to making yourself stronger at answering these special types of questions. So let's look at our three big categories of questions. The first category is SIRS number 1. That's the foundations of comprehension questions. Second category, reasoning within the text. Third category, reasoning beyond the text. And these are the three CARS, critical analysis and reasoning skills, that we talked about last time. So how many people remember the type of question really that the foundations of comprehension questions are? They're not posted yet, Rachel. The recordings are not posted yet, that is. So what kind of a question at its heart is a foundations of comprehension question? Are we having to figure anything out, or are we just reading it? It's literally based, yeah, it's content based. It's what's on the page. So your answer choices are really just, they're paraphrased versions of what's on the page. So I generally refer to these as retrieval type questions. Which one of these three types asks you to extend your knowledge to new scenarios? The reasoning beyond the text. So CARS number 3, reasoning beyond the text, asks me to, here's a new thing, what would the author think about it? That type of question. Which questions are the most common? SIRS 1, 2, or 3. Or sorry, CARS 1, 2, or 3. Which ones are the most common? Actually, reasoning beyond the text are the most common. Number 3, by a slight edge. Almost matched with reasoning within the text, and there's a lot fewer of the question ones, the type ones. And that's to be expected. They're really trying to challenge you guys on your reading comprehension skills. So your most common are going to be 3, then 2, then 1. So how do I approach these, and how do I recognize what kind of a question it is? I forgot I had these things on there. So in order to attack these types of attacking foundations of comprehension questions, these are the ones I'm going to do first. These are the ones that are going to cause me to go find information in the passage in the first place, because I don't want to do the questions in order. And I'm going to encourage you guys to never do the questions in order. This goes in the sciences as well. There is a reason why you would want to do the certain questions before others. Number one of those reasons is confidence. Which questions you're going to feel more confident on? Ones where I can find the information as written, or ones that I have to like extend to a new situation? Which ones will make you feel better? The retrieval questions, the easier retrieval questions. You're going to look to the passage and there it is. It's right there in black and white, and you could point at it. You can identify it. Those are going to be the questions that are going to make you feel more confident. And if you do those first, you build that confidence of like going through the passage like, oh, I understand this passage better now. Which is why, like, regardless of whether you read the whole passage or you go to the questions and cherry pick, it doesn't matter to like that you've read the whole passage. It's still most direct and most easy to do these types of questions first, these retrieval type. So that's why you usually can just scan through the passage and find the information fairly readily. All right. So how do you recognize these questions? Any phrases that you might assume would come in a retrieval type question? What are some things that they set up in questions to do that? Based on the passage, according to the passage. They would actually give you a paragraph number most of the time. They do that a lot. Anything else? You guys already gave me according to the passage. Oops. When so-and-so says, yeah, they refer to a specific person or blah, blah, blah means. They're giving you a direct quote right out of it. So anytime they're quoting the passage directly, that's probably a retrieval type question, yes. Anything else? There's two I words they use a lot, which technically have different meanings, but the MCAT treats them like they're the same. What's the I word I'm talking about in this one? What's the other I word that goes along with imply that nobody ever gets straight? Not indicate. It's like it means the same thing, but not quite the same thing. How about that one? What's the other I word? Infer. Infer and imply. Oh, the ever weirdly confused words infer and imply. I'm not going to go into the difference here. Why? Because you don't actually need to know the difference for the MCAT. As far as the MCAT's concerned, those words are exactly the same. So just treat it that way. It says, the passage says. That's what these are. All these questions are retrieval to say the passage says. In the discussion, that's another common phrase they'll say, blah, blah, blah. So these are all things you want to watch out for to tell you that it's one of these easier type questions. So one of the things that I do when I'm reading one of these questions is I'm going to look for keywords that I'm going to scan for. And keywords, this is a weird thing. Keywords aren't just words that are characteristic to the question. They're special words that have, say, unique spellings in them. So having a combination of letters that don't show up that often together. Why would I look for something like that? Why would I want to identify that in a keyword? Yeah, it's going to totally be easier to find. If you're looking for a unique pair of characters or three characters in a row that don't show up together most of the time, it's going to be easier it's going to jump out at you more. In fact, here's an editor's trick. I mean, I do this all the time when I'm writing. You guys might try the same. If I have a place where I need to get back to and like replace a word or something, I put the letter T and K together. So I put the letter TK, or the phrase TK. You may have never heard of this, but does TK exist in the English language in any words, any known words? I can hear you all racking your brains right now. Like, are there any words I know that have T and K together? And I'll say, like, in the dictionary, there's no TK words out there. So it's a unique situation. You can find it very quickly. It just jumps out at you because you don't see it ever. Now I know somebody's going to go find that one word that has a T and a K in it, and it's probably some like really esoteric thing, but you get what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying? Uncommon words that you're not going to see. So the, or Mr., or a name that shows up like 17 times in the passage, not a good keyword to look for. People, places, or things. These are always good things to look for because they're often referred to only once, or like they begin a paragraph. They usually begin things. Quotations, always. Line references, always. These are my go-tos, man. If there's a line reference or a paragraph reference, what should you do at that point? Highlight it, mark it in the passage, and read it. In fact, my opinion is like, just even if you've read the passage already, read the paragraph again before you answer the question. Because you're just like, you're re-putting it into the short-term memory so you can access it better. So like, do whatever you can to emphasize that, like, okay, there's a line reference or a quotation or a paragraph reference that tells me exactly where this answer is. The answer will be in there. However, one of the things I want you to remember to do is read up, read down. And what I mean by that read up, read down is that Just because it says it's in paragraph 3, you need to get context from paragraph 2 and paragraph 4. So you might need to look a little into 2 and a little into 4 to make sure you understand why they're saying what they said in paragraph 3. So it's actually one of the things I see a lot of students do on passages where you pick the answer that shows up in paragraph 3, but you may have misunderstood what it was saying because you didn't read a little bit into paragraph 2, and the answer actually came from the last line of paragraph 2. So just because it says paragraph 3 in a question, do a little bit higher than that, do a little bit lower than that. Expand your window just a little bit. And when you expand that window, you're more likely to find the correct information. All right. And then always source your answer. I'm a big fan of this phrase. A friend of mine uses this as well. And we just like emphasize the crap out of this. Never just go by your memory. Even though you might have read the passage and you were pretty sure that's the answer, I want you to go back and find your answer. Find it in the text itself. Why would I say that? Why is your memory not reliable? Yeah, stamina, pressure, time. There's another thing too, the answer choices. One of the most common things for them to do in the answer choices is recycle language. So they might pull another answer choice, like straight out of the, lift it right out of the paragraph, verbatim. The correct answer isn't verbatim, it's a little bit of a paraphrase. And so your mind sees the words on the page that it just read and goes, oh, I remember that. And you pick it. Oh, just fell for the trap. It was recycled language. It's also true you make assumptions without reading it again. So you might you remember it differently than what the context may have said. So there's a lot of reasons just to make sure, go back, take the time to do it. And people always tell me, well, doesn't this take more time? And I say, yes, it does take more time. But the funny thing is, taking the time to go back and do this will make you overall spend less time, because you don't get caught up in that, like, well, is it A, is it B, is it A, or is it B, or I kind of like A and kind of like B. And I know you've had questions like that, right? Where you just sort of waffle back and forth, and all that's doing is wasting precious time. Just go back, prove it, move on. So what about this question stem tells me that's a retrieval question? Let's everybody identify the thing that makes this retrieval. In the discussion. A common thread, I wouldn't say so much, but I would definitely say in the discussion, it's saying it's in the passage. That's another way to say in the passage. But a common thread, that's not bad. I just think it's more direct to say in the discussion. What might be a word in this, or keyword in this passage that are in this question that I would want to look for? Suburban. And you don't even have to look for the whole word. I looked for Suber. Like, I don't normally see Suber as a thing. And then also fast food. And I was looking for STF in the passage when I was looking for this question, STF. STF is a combination of letters that I am more likely to recognize. If I'm looking for fast and food, I'm going to see fast, I'm going to see food potentially, but I'm looking for the combination of fast food. Little tricks of the trade. How about this guy? What tells me this is a retrieval question? Straight up, information in the passage. So what would be a key thing to look for here? Rationalized, travel agency. I looked for lized, L-I-Z-E-D. I'm betting that's probably a word that doesn't get used much in there. They're probably not talking about penalized and rationalized and trivialized all in the same passage. So lies is a nice unique thing. Let's see, what else? What about this one? Yep, according to the passage. Like I said, these are easy to pick out. That's why they're great, just to jump to those and do them first. And then what about the keyword? What's my key thing to look for? Sativ. I like the sativ. I looked for I've fee, but sativ works too. There's probably not a lot of sativs in the text. So again, yes, the keywords are technically positive feelings, but I'm also thinking, what in those words am I looking for? You want to make a conscious decision about that, of like, what is it that's going to be easiest for me to find? And then finally, it can be inferred from the passage, blah, blah, blah. What is this one? I just gave it away. I'm going to say it can be inferred. What are my keywords? Yeah. Rariakad. Anybody else have something that thinks stands out to them? Sort of focused on that part. It is like alphabet soup, totally. I like ICWRI. ICWRI. Probably not going to see anything like that elsewhere in the passage. ICRI. So that's what I'm searching for. ICRI. So to bring that up, I might have mentioned this last time, but I'm going to say it again. To get better at what we're doing when we're looking for keywords, what's a good type of puzzle to work? I know you don't have time to do puzzles, but puzzles are easy and they're cheap and they're fast and they don't take a lot of time. What kind of a puzzle could you do that would help with this? Yeah, word search puzzles. Word search puzzles, you can go online, find word search puzzles all over the place. And that is actually a skill that can help you on a standardized test like this. I would totally want you to do that. All right. What about the next type of questions? How do we recognize these guys? Attacking reasoning within the text questions. So the reason I have question stems on here already is because these you might not be as familiar with the prompts on. So these are the ones I actually do next. And they're actually asking me why the author wrote something a lot of times. Like, why did the author say this? Why did the author say that? Why did they say it this way? So in the first prompt, what is it that jumps out as a key that's going to help me recognize this particular question? What part of question stem 1 tells me I'm having to do a reasoning within the text question? Somebody's looking for like the structure of the passage, why the author said something. Not just the author's argument, but the author's argument suggests. That set of words, author's argument suggests that. So it's basically, this is more of a structural question. It's saying, find the author's argument and now tell me what it suggests about this thing. Like, why did they tell me this? It's to make me think something else. So author's argument suggests is a really common question structure for these things. How about number 2? What keyword or phrase pops out here? Yes, assumptions. Which of the following assumptions is made by the author? That's a common piece that they're asking you about. Okay, you understand there's going to be assumptions going into their writing. So look for the assumptions. How about number 3? What is it there that suggests this is a reasoning within the text, like understanding why or how the author said things? Yep, author most likely mentions. So they're asking, why did he do this? He most likely mentions it in order to blah, blah, blah. How about number 4? This has actually got a paired, so I'll already give you the assumptions part. But there's another part that shows up in other questions. Most central to the author's argument. So it's basically saying, what do you think the author is emphasizing the most when making the point? So again, it's sort of understanding how and why the author is doing things. And then what's the thing in question number 5? I mean, this one can't be any more obvious when I'm mentioning how or why. Because the format of those questions is, we're asking, what is the function? Yep. What is the function of the statement? So when they're bringing up the word function, yeah, like that's just definitely saying, why did the author write it, or what is it meaning to accomplish? So what is the function? And then, yeah, in this one, they do include a direct reference. So this would probably be the first version of the question I would answer. So some other things that might show up in here: main point. What is the author's main point in the first paragraph? Or assumptions, we already saw that one. Author believes or mentions. What is the function, or how did the author structure the essay? So all things to tell you what to do, like what the author is trying to accomplish. Now, what is it that helps make these questions easier? And this is actually a interesting question. Every passage that you're going to read has a purpose, has a main point, and has a tone. A tone is clearly different than the other two. What is the difference between purpose and main point? Yeah, the purpose is the why, and the main point is what it's about. A lot of times what ends up happening, and I see this in a lot of the techniques that are presented in texts, in like some of the books and stuff, where it kind of superimposes them on each other. I think it's important to keep them separate and say, the author wrote this to convince me about something. The author wrote this to inform me about something. The author wrote this to, insert reason why they wrote things here. The main point is just what it's about, and that can be separate. The reason why I want to keep purpose and tone separate from main point is that if I understand that the author's trying to convince me of something, what kind of a tone is it probably going to have? Is it going to have a very positive, neutral, or a very negative tone if the author's trying to convince me of something? It's going to be either very positive or very negative. It's going to have that extra input of negative or positive language, because you can convince somebody, you can try to convince somebody something or persuade them. That's a good word for it. You can persuade them using both positive rhetoric or negative rhetoric, but it in fact is going to have a distinct tone. If the main purpose is to inform, what is your tone most likely going to be? It's most likely to be neutral or slightly positive or slightly negative. And you'll see that some authors, they slip a little bit, and they'll You know, they're trying to be informative, but then you can clearly see that they're pro something, or you can clearly see that they're con something, but they're for most part neutral. So when you're looking at these things, I actually say when you finish reading the passage over, or scanning the passage, or whatever you're doing, write on your scratch board or scratch paper the purpose, the main point, and the tone. You probably don't have to read the whole thing to do this. You can kind of get an idea by looking at each paragraph and seeing what some of the language is in there, and the word choice they choose. So if I use a word like never do this, is that neutral, slightly positive, slightly or very positive, slightly negative, or very negative? Never is a very negative word. It's an extreme word. But if I say you want to consider other options. So that's slightly positive, slightly negative, neutral, very positive, very negative. Consider other options. It's a slightly negative. It could be slightly positive as well. It just depends on context. But it's only a slightly. It's not extremely negative or extremely positive. So there's a difference in extremes. So you want to watch out for that tone. So when I'm looking at main purpose, main point, and tone, the purpose is what they're trying to accomplish. Like, what are they trying to accomplish with the passage? I usually narrow it down to 4 categories. It's a narrative, it's descriptive, it's expository, or it's persuasive. A narrative is a story. Descriptive is that kind of just the informational. Expository kind of bridges that gap between descriptive and persuasive, and the persuasive is usually the most extreme in tone when you see it. The main point should include everything from the passage, not one paragraph. And I see this happen from time to time where I'll even do this, where I see one paragraph and I understand it real well, and so that becomes my main point for the whole passage. That's actually a bad thing to do, because it's probably more broad than just that one paragraph. You should be including fragments from the whole passage to include in your main point that you're coming up with. And then finally, with tone, I actually identify it as being plus, 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 0, minus, or minus, minus. That's what I write on my scratch board. Very positive, slightly positive, neutral, slightly negative, and very negative. These are just notes to myself, because as I'm answering the questions, I can use this to answer questions. Like, most of the time, if I'm in a neutral or slightly negative or positive passage, say a descriptive essay, should I be looking at answers like always and negative, or always and never and cannot? Are those good answer choices for that passage? The passage descriptive. Should I see in a descriptive passage cannot, never, always? No, they're way too extreme. The author isn't using that tone. If the author doesn't use that tone, the answers can't use that tone. If I'm in a passage that uses those words, never, always, cannot, then they're a good answer. So context is important. That's why you want to understand what the tone of the passage is. Now, a word about that really quick. There's 2 phrases I'll run by you. Killing somebody is always bad versus murder is always bad. Which one of those is an appropriate use of the word always? Killing is always bad. Murder is always bad. Which one fits better with the word always? Why murder? Why is that one just carry that connotation? It has to be always rather than killing. Not only is murder more negative, but it is actually straight up the definition of the term. Killing could be a context thing, but murder is defined as being an illegal act, correct? Murder is illegally killing somebody, which is by definition always bad. So you got to watch for little things like that. It's a really subtle thing you got to look for, but it's in there. And if you start paying attention to that, you're going to start picking up on bad answers really easily. All right, reasoning beyond the text. What in question stem number 1 would help me understand that this is a question I'm going to be doing last, and that it's trying to figure out how the author applies the language or their knowledge. What's the phrase in this one? I think if is too narrow. Actually, there is no if in that one, is there? I think you might have meant of. But yeah, I think it's the would predict. They're saying the author would predict something, right? That's saying, okay, here's a new scenario. What would the author think about it? What about number 2? Best represents. This is what I actually refer to as an analogy question. They're saying, okay, they're going to give me 4 things that are analogous to what's in the passage. I got to pick the best analogy. How about number 3? It's not just the word suggest, because we saw suggests before in the number 2 types, but in combination with the word suppose. Suppose here's a new situation. Now, what would the author suggest is the solution or explanation, etc. It's the suppose suggest combo that really that's flagging there. And how about that last one, number 4? Assume as true. And that's always the phrase they're going to say, or if they just say assume, you should always assume it's true. And honestly, for all of these types of questions, for any of the new information, should you ever treat it as false, or should you always treat it as true? You have to treat the always information as always true, because otherwise you're going to go down the slippery slope of not understanding what they're doing. And the MCAT is written that way. The MCAT's written so that when they ask these kinds of questions, it's assuming that whatever this alternative fact is true. Whether or not it's true is irrelevant, but you need to assume it's true straight up. So some other phrases: strengthen, weaken. Blah, blah, blah with most strengthen, or most weaken, or least strengthen, or least weaken the author's argument. Assume or suppose. Would predict. Author would agree or disagree. What represents. So we're always assuming this new information is true with these, and those are the phrases that tell us to do that. Now, a word about strengthen, weaken questions for a second. If I have a strengthen question, which of the following would least strengthen? Notice the phrasing. Which of the following would least strengthen the author's argument? So if I have an answer that weakens the author's argument, is that a good answer for a least strengthened answer? It's so picayune, but no, it does not. Because if it weakens it, it does not strengthen it. And the question was not what weakens it, it says what least strengthens it. So you don't see these a lot, these sort of negative versions of strengthen and weaken, but if it does the opposite, it is not a valid answer. So if it's a strengthen question, it has to strengthen. If it's a weaken question, it has to weaken. It can't do the opposite thing, even if it's a least strengthen or least weaken. So it's a weird thing, doesn't happen a lot, but do watch for it. So with these questions, just don't question the info. Don't decide agree or disagree or strengthen, weaken right away. And that's the thing, when you make that judgment, you often can slip into the wrong judgment, and then you're never going to consider the correct answer because you just said, no, 2 of the answers are out. Deal with the logic, the reasoning before you deal with the strengthen or the judgment call, I should say. Address logical fallacies in the answers. What is a logical fallacy? And if you just listen to the radio or the television, any news show, anytime you hear people talking in Facebook, you're seeing this. What is a logical fallacy? It's not necessarily something true that doesn't sound logical. That the logic is incomplete or the logic is false. Yes. And this is a difficult thing for you guys to identify because you're surrounded by terrible logic at all times. I mean, do you know what I'm saying? And like, do you see how I'm saying Facebook is probably one of the most logically fallacious places in the world? Because people can say anything they want, whether it's founded in logic or not. It's like the internet. It's not just Facebook, but it's the internet. So here's a book I'm going to suggest you guys get. I'm going to show you a picture of the cover. This book. Oh crap! Let me turn off my background. You can't see it with the background. Video. Choose the original background. Turn it off. This book. It looks like it's got a little dog on it. It's called The Fallacy Detective. It looks silly. It's for ages 12 and up. But that's actually the reason why it's awesome, because it's in the very basest terms how to identify logical fallacies. It's called The Fallacy Detective. The author is Nathaniel Bluedorn and Hans Bluedorn. Nathaniel and Hans Bluedorn. So it's a pretty cheap book. You can just get it off of Amazon, and it's a workbook. It has questions in it. Like says, okay, in list of issues below, try to think at least 2 sides to each issue. And it just makes you do things like this to decide whether you're looking at a red herring or a ergo hoc propter hoc, or you're looking at generalization, or you're looking at a hasty generalization, or you're looking at a analogy. So there's a lot of different type of logical fallacies. Why is it important to understand logical fallacies when answering these kinds of questions? Any ideas why this is a pretty good skill to develop? Yes, high school speech and debate, that is me. But how does it help us with these questions? What's one of the things when you're extending the idea to a new concept, what's one of the things you have to be careful of? So yeah, it can brush away answer choices that sound right, but you don't make sense to you. It's also in your own way of thinking. If you apply it to the answer choice incorrectly, if the information the passage gave you, then you very well might be making a logical fallacy to choose the answer. So mostly what I want you guys identifying logical fallacies for is simply to understand it in your own thinking. That's kind of a big deal. If you are making those assumptions in your mind and making these logical fallacies in your mind, you're more likely to fall for bad answers. So here's just an example of a lot of different, of some of the different logical fallacies: circular arguments, red herring, causal, appear to authority, equivocation. These are all weird words probably to you if you never took a logic class, but it's very worth doing it. So here's a couple references to logicalfallacies.org, or this article at thebestschools.org/magazine/15 logical fallacies. No, it's good to just familiarize yourself with this idea. The other thing is too, sometimes like the assumptions question, what are you looking for in the author's work? For an assumption question, what are you looking for in the author's work? For assumption questions, what are you looking for in the author's work? Yes, you're looking for the author's fallacies. Their fallacies of logic is an assumption. That is straight up a logical fallacy. So it like that is identifying a logical fallacy in there. Is anybody going to take the GRE at all? If you're taking the GRE, this is super for the verbal section. If you need to take the verbal section of the GRE, truly look for logical fallacies because that's what it's all about. And one of the essays is all a logical fallacy essay. All right, so now let's look at some of the common question types we see here that's like not this way, but like structural. We have the questions I call them ELNs, except least nots. I mentioned this last time. If you do true or false on the answer choices, you're more likely to come up with these being correct. So what I do is I actually will cross out the negating part, just cross out the negation part, and I answer it straight up as a true false question. So I know you guys can't do that on this question, but if the first answer is true, the second answer is true, the third answer is false, and the fourth answer is true, what's the correct answer for this question? I don't know what that was, but it's got to be C. So this true falsing, the non-negated version of the answer of the question, makes you pay more attention to it, because sometimes you just get caught in the moment and you're going to go for A because like, hey, A is true. Yay, pick the answer and move on. Oops, screwed up. Darn it. Roman numeral questions. What Roman numeral question do I want to look at first? Does it matter? You generally want to look for one that shows up twice. Sometimes it shows up twice in all cases, but the reason you want to start with the one that starts out twice is think about this. If the answer shows up 3 times, if the Roman numeral shows up 3 times and the others don't, is that answer probably true or false? It's probably true, because that's why they can put it in there. You're not going to be able to eliminate as much. The answer that shows up once is probably what? True or false? It's probably false because it means you can't eliminate as much. So this is a pretty tried and true Roman numeral question. In this case, it doesn't really matter. So when it doesn't matter, I just answer them in order. So I looked at Roman numeral 1 and I found out that that statement is false. So now what should I do? Before even looking at 2, what should I do? And this is to help me know to look at 2, actually, Michelle. Cross out all the answers with 1 and then investigate the remaining answer choices. And then I'm going to say to myself, okay, is 3 going to help me answer this question? No, because I know it's true. There's no reason for me to address Roman numeral 3 at all because it can't be right. So then I address Roman numeral 2 and I find out, yes, it's a true statement. So then my correct answer is actually D. So this is why you want to go through the eliminate as you go process, because it would have been pointless to try to look at Roman numeral 3 on this question. Once you had figured out 1 and 2, you already knew the answer. So be smart about these. Don't just jump into it. Then we have the 2x2 strategy. We got 2 pieces of information at in all the 4 combinations of it. Single versus multi, CE versus with CE versus without CE. How should you approach these? Should I try each answer as a whole or try each answer as a half? Do it half at a time, because if the answer is half wrong, it's all wrong. The answer is half wrong, it's all wrong. So yeah, just go half at a time. You don't have to deal with the big long part of it. So what we found in this one, okay, it's not multi-pair. So which 2 answers are wrong? C and D. And then I'm going to go after, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Then I'm going to go after the with or without. And let's say we found out from the passage that without CE is wrong. So I could eliminate based on that. And then what's my final answer? It's going to be B. Did we have to do it in that order? No. If I found the CE part of it first, then I'd answer that part first and then go to the multi versus single pair. So this is a fairly common question structure in this. It's fairly common in the cars. It's ridiculously common in the sciences. I'm betting you've probably noticed this if you've done any practice at all. This is used probably 35 to 40% of the time in some way, shape, or form in the sciences. It's really heavy-handed how often they use this question structure. Then there's another one that I call the 4x2 or 2x4 or whatever you want to call it. I usually call it the 4x2. I don't know why. It just brings better for me. But look at these answer choices. Where's the 4? The second or the first half of the answers? The second half of the answer is my 4, because how little we know. Aristotle's existence cannot be established. Pioneer of satirical poems. Ancient poet. All 4 of them are different. What's the 2 part of this one? Shh. The first part is emphasis versus recognize. So that's my judgment call. And is it easier to make a judgment call or prove or disprove facts? It's easier to disprove facts. So making the judgment call, emphasize and recognize, you could accidentally cross out the correct answer without ever getting it a fair shake. So I start with the second half on these kinds of questions. So I went through and says, well, we don't actually know much about Archilochus from this passage. We do know that they did say, well, what's wrong with B? Can somebody use a proper term or a term that I gave you earlier to say that B is just really not a good answer choice? Cannot. It's too extreme, man. Too extreme. I just turned that one away right away. And then I saw in the passage that he's not the pioneer of satirical poems. That was a different guy. And I also saw that, he was recognized as an ancient poet. We just don't know much about him. So what's my answer? It's A. I didn't ever have to make a judgment of emphasize or recognize. I don't have to make that decision. And that's why it's nice to do it this way, because you don't have to make a decision. Everybody with me so far? But you wouldn't actually be able to know this, Rachel, because I don't have the passage with it. So I'm saying when I was reading the passage, it did say he was an ancient poet. It just said we didn't know anything about him. We know he existed, but we don't know very much about him. How little we know seems a little strong. It doesn't close the door, though. So it doesn't say we know nothing about him. It just says we know very little about him. Extreme language is going to be completely shutting the door, saying it's not possible. We know nothing. But we do know a little. We know he was an ancient poet, according to the passage, which means we know a little about him.